children we left at home are eagerly waiting for a positive outcome from Samuel's sake. Let us put our differences aside and ensure that COP27 is truly where all implementation of the Paris Agreement begins. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Andrew R. Yetelman, Minister of Environment, Climate Change and Emergency Management of the Federated States of Micronesia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are on the verge of losing control of the climate system. The planet is warming beyond what the natural system can sustain. It is warming beyond what many humans, especially beyond what all small island states can survive. We hear the phrase climate emergency so often, it has lost significance. It is clear that many who say or hear this phrase do not truly understand what is at risk. All of humanity is at risk. Collective efforts to date to reduce emissions are grossly inadequate. So much so that the planet is starting to warm itself. Scientific projections tell us that the world could surpass the 1.5 degree Celsius limit within a decade or less, which will in turn trigger irreversible tipping points. Simply put, it is getting too hot and the time for effective action is dwindling. We urgently need climate solutions that can reduce the greatest amount of warming in the shortest amount of time. Time and temperature must guide our investments and drive capital towards solutions that slow warming the most in the near term. We know the solutions. Slash the emissions of short-lived climate pollutants in the near term to buy time for decarbonization in the long term. Undoubtedly, decarbonization is critical for climate stability. However, cutting CO2 on its own doesn't slow warming at all for decades. Small islands carry the greatest burden, but contribute the least to the problem. We will lead by example, but ultimately we need all G20 countries and large emitters, especially the developed countries, to take emergency-level action, for our sake and for yours. These solutions require cooperation. It is time to put aside differences and mistrust. It is time to work as a team. We call on donor countries, multilateral development banks, and other major financing institutions to prioritize fast action on methane and other superpollutants. The international financing institutions must catalyze additional grants, ensure that half of their lending goes to climate, and direct at least half of their funding to cut the short-lived climate pollutants. Because cutting methane is the single biggest and fastest way to slow warming, and we need to put big money behind this strategy. Provided with funding, many partners worldwide are prepared to deploy methane-cutting solutions, many of which bring health, economic, food security, co-benefits across all sectors. Fast action on the short-lived pollutants can also avoid escalating loss and damage. By bending the warming curve now with fast action, we can contain loss and damage as we continue to construct the global cooperative solutions to avoid and remedy the impacts developing countries are experiencing now. The Santiago Network on Loss and Damage must become a powerful, trustworthy institution that offers emergency response in the form of financial resources, technology, and capacity. It is the life or death response of an emergency room for critical circumstances, and it is founded on the very principles of equity and fairness contained in the Convention. It will be exponentially more costly to delay investments, pushing the world further out of control. Developed countries must be decisive in delivering their finance promises, especially to the most vulnerable. We call on all lending countries and institutions to put in place debt for climate initiatives that reduce the debt burden and channel funding where it is needed most. In addition, here at COP27, we urge donor countries to make meaningful progress on the new collective quantified climate finance goal. Island nations are stewards of the world's oceans and have been for thousands of years. As such, we are the ocean's voice, speaking for ecosystems and aquatic life that cannot defend itself. The ocean provides, and yet it is not protected. Urgent action must be taken to solve the ocean crisis. Support for the oceans should be prioritized this coming decade, including increasing the role of the ocean as a carbon sink, prudent and equitable approaches to blue carbon, and leveraging the indigenous knowledge of ocean-based countries to increase and upscale action globally. We look forward to strong decisions here at COP27 that equitably and meaningfully advance climate solutions to preserve the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature limit. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Irina Vujovic, Minister of Environmental Protection of Serbia. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues. First and foremost, allow me to extend a heartfelt congratulations to the government of Egypt for organizing an excellent conference, despite the challenges we all face today worldwide. We are all aware of the fact that the mean global temperature increased by 1.1 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial level. However, the average temperature increase in the Republic of Serbia has already reached 1.8 degrees. Hence, the minimum material damage in the Serbia in the period from 2000 to 2020 is estimated to have exceeded 6.8 billion euros. More than 70% of the damage was caused by droughts and high temperatures due to climate change and extreme weather events. We take seriously our task to prepare the Republic of Serbia for all challenges and concurrently contribute to the global fight against climate change. Therefore, I'm especially pleased to be able to announce that this year in August, the Republic of Serbia submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat its revised nationally determined contribution, thus confirming not only our commitment to curbing the greenhouse gas emissions, but also pledging to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 33.3% by 2030 and raising our climate ambition by more than 3 times compared to our first NDC. Our vision is prosperous and climate-resilient Serbia. This vision forms the backbone of our future low-carbon development strategy, thus paving our way towards decarbonization for the whole society. The future strategy will lay the foundations for Serbia with cleaner, reliable and renewable energy sources and increased energy efficiency and ensure resilient, protected forest and nature, including the integration of nature-based innovative solutions. In line with our vision, we are also intensively working on our first climate change adaptation program, which will strengthen the Republic of Serbia in terms of climate risk and its assessment as well as adaptation to climate change. This program will improve measures in the most vulnerable sectors such as agriculture, water management, forestry and human health. As reliable partners, we are committed not only to the Paris Agreement, but also to join the European Union. As the largest economy in the Western Balkans, we confirmed our commitment to achieving EU Green Deal targets by signing the Sofia Declaration on the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. We must not forget the transition to a low-carbon society must be just and fair, leaving no one behind. Our need to act is supported by the estimation that the cost of inaction would amount to 53 billion euros, which is more expensive than our long-term low-carbon transformations. Dear ministers, respected delegates, I invite you to work jointly for the well-being of current and future generations. That is why we need to show solidarity. The Sharm el-Sheikh conference represents a key chance to adopt the decisions that will much influence the framework of actions as regards the most important aspect of our life, the preservation of our common home, the planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. John M. Selg, Minister of Natural Resources and Commerce of Marshall Islands. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, colleague ministers, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from the Republic of the Marshall Islands. In the Republic of the Marshall Islands, our ancestors sailed the mighty Pacific Ocean with unparalleled knowledge of the ocean currents, crossing huge distances to settle on our atolls. Remote as we may appear on the map, we are not far from the tides of history. Though history has not been kind to us, it has taught us that we are all deeply interconnected. Every inch of our island was fought over bitterly in the last century. Our nation became the testing ground on the most destructive weapons ever known to man. And today, the world's biggest emitters watch as the rising seas threaten every inch of our livable territory while building islands, new islands, for themselves to prepare for the next war. We have been resilient in the face of colonialism, war, and nuclear testing. Today, the continued extraction of fossil fuels is unleashing the next onslaught on our islands. We will face this with resilience again. And this time, we ask that we do it together. We don't have the capacity or the finances to do it ourselves. Actions have consequences on all of us. We see the floods, fire, and famine that unchecked emissions have brought. In the Pacific, the ocean is rising and submerging our homes. And it is submerging the radioactive waste left behind from decades of nuclear testing, now at risk of flowing into that interconnected ocean. The loss and damage climate change impacts happening right now, the world over, is escalating faster and faster. Let me be clear. We don't want loss and damage funding. We didn't want adaptation funding. We need it now because the mitigation efforts we have been asking for decades have not been made. We now have a space to discuss these funding arrangements. We cannot afford further delay. It is time for a new fit-for-purpose fund that provides finance as the tolls of this crisis grows higher. Until emissions are reduced to zero, the global temperatures will continue to rise, and major emitters, you will continue to rake up a moral and financial debt to us. We want that debt to be as small as possible, for we would rather keep our homes than be forced to come to yours. And while we, at all nations, face a threat at a scale and speed that few others do, nowhere on earth will all be safe if we fail to stay within 1.6 Celsius by peaking global emissions by 2025. It will not be safe if we fail to invest in resilience, starting with doubling of adaptation finance and a show of solidarity in Glasgow that brought us here today. But it is far from what is needed. The climate finance needed is in the trillions, and yet we live in a world in which there are individuals that owe more personal wealth than the annual commitment of climate finance promised by developed nations to those of us in need. 100 billion, a promise that remains unfulfilled. Billionaires dream of going to Mars, but for us in the Marshall Islands, our dream is simple: to preserve a piece of the earth for our children and their children. Mr. President, fellow ministers, the task we face could not be greater. And to win, we need everyone at the table. The exclusion of Taiwan from this process, when the people of that nation are as much at risk as we all are in the face of climate change, is unacceptable. Human rights, the right to live, the right to self-determination, are at risk due to climate change. And as ambitious countries, we are grateful to our youth, to our civil society, who have raised their voices for the cost of justice and rights. We must remember that human rights are a core part of our consideration here and should be respected. Fellow ministers, we have solutions. We must implement them. Renewables have never been easier, cheaper, and more lasting energy choice to make. In 2018, my country launched the RMI electricity roadmap that lays out and illustrates the pathway for us to achieve our national determined contributions. And again, we seek your partnership and collaboration in meeting our NTCs. We have the potential to draw down emissions in high-emitting sectors quickly. In maritime shipping, for example, we can reduce zero emissions by 2050. As one of the largest shipping registries in the world, we are calling for a carbon levy in the IMO, ranging from 100 per ton, that would actually give companies a reason to decarbonize and provide a source of revenue for developing nations. Mr. President, ministers, we cannot escape the drop of water melting glaciers or the salt that seeps into our wells as king tides invade our wells. In this interconnected world, I ask you to stand in solidarity with us and to take the difficult and bold decisions that this moment in our history demands. And finally, Mr. President, all we have as a people in the Marshall Islands, we have received as a sacred trust, which we have pledged ourselves through our Constitution to safeguard and maintain, valuing nothing more dearly to us than our rightful place at home on these islands. And we extend to all other peoples around the world what we profoundly seek from them: peace, friendship, mutual understanding, and respect for our common humanity. All we ask from each of us as a people, Mr. President, All we have from the Marshall Islands is a piece of the earth for our children and their children to call home. Thank you, Komolada. God bless.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Tesfaye Gebrselassie Sebatu, Minister of Land, Water and Environment of Eritrea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, honorable ministers, distinguished participants of the conference, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Mr. President, COP27 is taking place 30 years after the Rio Earth Summit that culminated in the three significant conventions with a commonly shared objective to protect our planet Earth and the integrity of its delicate ecosystem against the damage wrought by human activities. To us, the said conventions represent humanity's solemn vow to reconcile with its conscience and with nature, and through sincere partnership to deal with all forms of past and ongoing injustices and excesses. Notwithstanding the optimism-inspiring objectives and many promises made in subsequent conference of parties, it is distressing and dismal, to say the least, that actions taken so far have not been commensurate with the gravity of the existential threat that the world is facing due to global warming and overall environmental degradation. IPCC's recent assessment reports are worrying. They indicate the cumulative emission reduction pledges and other mitigation measures fall far short to hold average global temperature increase at 1.5 degrees centigrade, a target for which, among other things, the Paris Agreement has been much acclaimed. As climate tipping points are crossed every year, raging cyclones, torrential tropical rains, and melting glaciers and polar ice that loosen deadly floods, droughts that destroy crops, sea level rise, wildfires that devastate forests, and biodiversity losses have already become common occurrences. And attendant human sufferings and damages, as we are witnessing, are getting ever unbearable, colossal, and catastrophic. Yet, as repeatedly stated, science has shown us not only how the world got into the present crisis, but also the way out. Mr. President, Eritrea's emission has ever been very negligible, and because of our geographic position and lack of adaptive capacity, we have been among the countries most impacted by climate change. But cognizant of the fact that the fight against global warming and environmental degradation is about doing everything what it takes to save our irreplaceable planet and life, in all conscience, my delegation strongly believes that every party has a role to play, however differentiated it may be, to win the fight. In this regard, as can be expected, we have been focusing on nature-based activities that enhance resilience and adaptive capacities of our communities. In an effort to solve energy poverty and reduce dependence on biomass and fossil fuel, we have just started to implement modest solar energy projects, and we have seen for ourselves that it works, but still a lot remains to be done and to be achieved. As per the outstanding call for parties to come up with more ambitious climate action plan, we will soon declare our revised NDC. Of course, bilateral and multilateral financial capacity building support will be key to overcome impasses for its expedited and enhanced implementation. Mr. President, At present, the world is facing many challenges. However, the global warming is the most overwhelming, with far-reaching consequences both for now and posterity. In the face of this reality, backsliding from climate action commitments and unfulfilled promises should not be permissible. Therefore, Eritrea delegation joins with the voices of developing countries, particularly African and the least developed countries, that strongly call for immediate and drastic emission reduction of greenhouse gases to be made, particularly by the G20 countries, doubling provision of adaptation fund by 2025 compared to that of 2019, adoption of finance and operational modalities and structures to address loss and damage inflicted by climate change, enhanced concessional and grant financial support for just energy transition investment for renewable energy and low-carbon program and projects at scale for energy-poor countries to enhance energy access. In conclusion, Mr. President, I recall that history is a testimony to the fact that people, when left to their devices, often tend to evade common obligation in order to promote their narrow interests. This and the absence of accountability mechanism have been a major problem that undermines trust and confidence in international systems and the whole process of climate negotiation. Therefore, the historical relevance of Sharm el-Sheikh will depend on it being able to rebuild trust and revive lost hopes by taking us together from pledges and promises to implementation. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Francisca Enimi Ifwa, Minister of Agriculture, Livestock, Forests, Environment of Equatorial Guinea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegations, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to take the floor in this summit of global leaders on climate change on behalf of and representing the President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Ngame Mbasogo, and on behalf of the people of Equatorial Guinea and myself. I wish to express my gratitude to His Excellency the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, His Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, for hosting us in this summit. Your Excellencies, climate change is a global issue that requires the cooperation of all nations. Time is running out, and instead of shifting away from fossil fuels and focusing on clean energies, many countries are continuing to invest in gas and petrol and oil. They are not reducing their emissions at the necessary speed, and they are bargaining with the developing countries regarding assistance. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the levels of emissions of our country are practically insignificant. However, during the summit climate in Paris, our country committed through our nationally determined contributions to reduce our emissions by 20% by 2030. And the target was to achieve 50% by 2050. At COP25, which was held in Madrid, the mandate was to scale up the ambition of our nationally determined contributions, and in so doing, Equatorial Guinea worked on updating its NDC, and we increased our ambition by reducing emissions by 35%. Our ambition is to reduce it by 35% by 2030, and of course the target is to achieve 50% by 2050. Our country, like other vulnerable countries, have been undergoing the exacerbated impacts of climate change over the past 20 years. Equatorial Guinea over the past 10 years has been working to achieve this newly set ambition, taking into account that the level of reduce emission, we have shifted from producing 100% of our energy from fossil fuels to producing 40% of our energy from renewable energies, in most of it from hydroelectric resources. We developed a national strategy for reducing emissions caused by deforestation and forest degradation, REDD+, with our corresponding national investment plan. With respect to adaptation, we have been undertaking a vast river training program to avert flooding, as well as building dikes and breakwaters in the country, in the coastal cities, to slow the growing invasion of seawater. The Glasgow objective was to achieve zero emissions through our development strategy. And my country believes that to make this real, we will need the effort and the commitment of developed countries in climate financing. My country is part of the community of countries of the Congo Basin, the second green lung to tackle climate change. And for this reason, it is a common sub-regional interest for us to develop adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage actions, as well as to develop ongoing training programs for national experts to improve the way in which we devise our projects to be able to access climate financing. Your Excellencies, I'll close by pointing to the importance of Congo Basin countries to address the needs of their forests to protect our development. However, this region is not receiving the support that it deserves as a second green lung and a regulator of climate change. It is only fitting that we all reflect on how we can actually achieve net zero emissions when this region is not even receiving the same opportunities to protect itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change of Canada. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to be here with you here in Sharm el-Sheikh. Last September, Atlantic Canada was battered by Hurricane Fiona. Lives were lost, houses destroyed, and coasts gravely eroded. Canada's experience is clearly not an isolated one. There are other major challenges that our world faces: the illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine, energy and food security, and inflation. However, the cost of climate inaction is much higher than that of action.
We are at an historic turning point. Canada advocates for loss and damage to be addressed at this COP. We must build together a robust solution that addresses gaps in the existing architecture and employs a full range of sources of finance. The magnitude of the challenge requires that all options be put on the table. We are putting some pieces into place on an early warning system, insurance and technical assistance. But we know that these actions alone are not sufficient. They are a down payment to demonstrate our commitment. We need to act with urgency, but also purpose, and avoid rushing headlong into solutions. Success at this COP also requires us to build from the foundation made in Glasgow. We must keep 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. À cette fin,
to that end, I urge you to meet the global challenge on carbon pricing launched by Prime Minister Trudeau in Glasgow. Cooperate with us to reduce methane emissions and accelerate the elimination of carbon-based energy. Let's take inspiration from the most vulnerable nations and communities. let's give them the means to act and include them in discussions. These are indigenous peoples, women, marginalized groups who are in the front line when it comes to climate change. Together, we have committed to mobilizing $100 billion for financing climate action between now and 2023. Canada is honoring its commitment of $5.3 billion in financing the struggle against climate change. Protection of nature and biodiversity must remain at the heart of our global action. That's why in December, Canada will be hosting the whole world in Montreal at the UN Convention on Biodiversity. Canada is ready, motivated and firmly committed to further cooperation and climate action and the protection of nature. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Kavidas Ramano, Minister of Environment, Solid Waste Management and Climate Change of Mauritius. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Your Excellencies, at the outset, let me express my sincere thanks to the Arab Republic of Egypt for hosting this crucial event. We are in the second week of this COP. Important papers have been tabled and various positions have been established. At the outset, Mauritius associates itself with the positions adopted by the Group of 77 and China, the African Group of Negotiators, and the Alliance of Small Island Developing States. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction reports that over the period running from 2009 to 2019, the number of climate-related natural disasters doubled compared with the two preceding decades, causing 1.23 million victims and costing more than $3,000 billion across the world. The annual commitment of $100 billion, which was undertaken in 2009 by developed countries, has not been upheld, and it may prove to be too little too late. The urgency of the situation cannot be overlooked. We are indubitably in a state of climate emergency, especially for small island development states where we're short on time to react and to build resilience. It is evident that current efforts and the initiatives that have been announced are insufficient if we are to maintain the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius. This point is a question of survival for us, and it cannot be compromised on. Mr. President, Mauritius is on the front line of those suffering the impacts of climate change. Decades of hard-won development are now under threat, and I must underscore the fact that all our climate indicators are in the red. The temperature increase in Mauritius is 1.39 degrees Celsius, and rising sea levels is at the rate of 5.6 millimeters annually and even 9 millimeters annually for Rodriguez Island. These figures are higher than the global average. A reduction in annual rainfall of 8% over the past 50 years has been observed, which is having a direct impact on our agriculture. Our beaches have eroded at a rate of 20 meters over the first decade in certain regions. Our tourism sector is under heavy impact. Given these unimpeachable facts, Mauritius committed to strengthening its resilience and its capacity to adapt. We are therefore contributing to the global effort to slow climate change, and we are taking a path of low carbon emissions, and we remain determined to ensure that there is a just human-centered transition, and our vision is to reconcile our efforts to make Mauritius resilient and carbon neutral by 2070. We want to achieve the SDGs. Our priority remains adaptation, but we are doing more than our fair share to contribute to the global mitigation goal. Despite a difficult economic context, we have taken the ambitious undertaking in our NDC to reduce by 40% our gas emissions, greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. We are therefore committed to gradually eliminating coal from our energy production model and to increase the share of renewable energies by 60% by 2030. The support of our development partners will be indispensable if we are to achieve these goals that have been established in our nationally determined contributions. Mr. President, I make a strident call to all stakeholders, especially developed countries, to recognize the unique features and vulnerabilities of small island developing states and Africa. It is now up to the developed countries to take urgent action to significantly reduce their own emissions so as to maintain global warming under the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. In addition to that, if there's to be an equitable transition, we must have doable, urgent decisions. We must have urgent decisions that are feasible, and these must be decisions on financing, adaptation, and mitigation. And we must ensure that the financing is adequate, accessible, and predictable. These mechanisms must recognize the unique features of each country, developing country, in formulating their own innovative financing instruments such as the climate debt swaps, green bonds, and blue bonds. Mr. President, we are hoping that we will arrive at a consensus on a financing mechanism for loss and damage, as well as finance flows that respect the vulnerability of countries by the end of this week. Mr. President, Excellencies, on this note, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Franz Stettenbach, Minister of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you. I want to thank the Egyptian government for hosting this conference. I'm grateful to the UN Secretary General, the Executive Secretary of the Convention, to the senior representatives of the states and technical teams, representatives of indigenous peoples that are represented here. I want to start by quoting the President of the Republic of Costa Rica, Rodrigo Chavez, who said that a vision without action is hallucination. This is the time to implement and step up the change required. Reduce emissions so as not to exceed 1.5 degrees. For financing adaptation and developing financial mechanisms to respond effectively and adequately to the catastrophic loss and damage resulting from extreme climate events. Costa Rica is located in Central America, one of the regions most vulnerable to climate change. Nevertheless, our early and effective action against deforestation and our national emergency system allowed us to mitigate much of the impacts and also human losses. In a single generation, we've managed to address problems of deforestation and expand the coverage of our forest mass without sacrificing food production. At the same time, we regenerated also our forests, and we generated agricultural production. Costa Rica has an agro-landscape which produces agricultural goods and ecosystem services with zero deforestation and net zero emissions. We've managed to decouple agricultural production from deforestation through an ambitious protected areas program, known as well as a mechanism of payment for environmental services to owners and traditional communities who are the guardians of the forest. Today, we are at COP27 on climate change. However, I want to take this opportunity to highlight the importance of coordinating work under the 3 Rio Conventions. For my country, it's crucial to achieve a far-reaching result both as well at the COP on the CBD, which will be held in Montreal next month. As part of our international commitments, Costa Rica co-chairs the High ambition coalition for nature and persons, together with France and the UK, which brings together more than 110 countries who promote the conservation of 30% of lands and oceans of the world between now and 2030. This is the minimum scientifically required measure, and it's also stipulated in the most recent IPCC report to stop loss of biodiversity and tackle climate change and desertification. My country is the first in Latin America to successfully complete all the necessary steps to receive funds for reducing carbon emissions through the conservation of forests through the REDD+ program. We can say with pride that our history of conservation and combating climate change started many years ago and is getting stronger every day. Costa Rica would also like to recognize the efforts of the UK and the co-chairs of Ghana and the US in establishing the Partnership of Climate and Forest Leaders, the FCLP in English, which Costa Rica fully supports. We think it's highly important to incorporate forests and the use of land under innovative cooperation mechanisms which include different stakeholders. Costa Rica is implementing has for many years produced all our electricity using low-emission renewables. We've now almost reached the level of 100% of zero-emissions electricity. My country has renewable energy resources necessary to duplicate its electric production without emissions and advance in the last stage of carbon neutrality, which would see the electrification of all transport. Finally, I call on all parties and sectors here to honour and deliver on their financing commitments, to step up their mitigation adaptation action, and to implement the much-needed reforms to stop climate change that is bringing the world to a tipping point. Costa Rica is doing its utmost, but these global problems which require global cooperation, including South-South and triangular cooperation, and they require collective commitment from one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Matthew Zamora, Minister without portfolio in the Ministry of Economic Growth, of Job Creation with the responsibility for water, environmental and climate change of Jamaica. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
I am pleased to present Jamaica's views to the high-level segment of the 27th Conference of the Parties to the UNFCCC. Jamaica thanks the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for their efforts in hosting COP27. We acknowledge the COP President, Dr. Sameh Shoukry, as it is under his mandate we hope to truly be together for implementation. This is a theme Jamaica endorses. Mr. President, it reflects two key sub-themes. The first is together. The climate change emergency cannot be tackled by a single country, but by every nation playing their role within their respective capabilities. The second is implementation. Again, because it is in implementation, those commitments and ambitious plans that we begin to shift the needle. Mr. President, this year has been another unprecedented one. People continue to grapple with multiple hazards, further straining on already fragile economies and the natural resources on which we rely. The impact on lives around the world has been devastating. Our Caribbean brothers and sisters in Belize and St. Lucia have faced devastation in the last 10 days. In Jamaica, there is a popular saying, "No problem, man." But this does not apply to the current crisis. It may be more accurate to say more problem, man, because the impacts of climate change are already being experienced and those to come have not been adequately addressed. Loss and damage has not been given its due attention and support. Jamaica is calling for action. Mr. President, Excellencies, the global financial architecture and mechanisms must change. Sadly, there are still issues of access that must be rectified and made simpler. Small island states have been voicing concerns as well about the growing dissonance in establishing a loss and damage funding arrangement. We unreservedly join with other developing countries in calling for a loss and damage fund that help countries address the inevitable impacts. Mr. President, Jamaica has not sat idly by since COP26. The country has advanced a holistic national disaster risk financing strategy. We have a catastrophe bond in place to provide significant financial protection against named storms up until the end of 2023. Jamaica, along with partners, launched the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool to increase climate change considerations in investment and risk assessment. We are preparing a national adaptation plan accompanied by a financial strategy and investment plan. A national 3 million tree planting program is already underway. We can report that more than 2.4 million trees have since been planted, a result of stakeholders working together for implementation. We have launched an EV policy and reduced taxes to make the transition more competitive. We have reduced taxes for solar panels, making the option more appealing. Jamaica has already and always supported the multilateral system, as it gives us a seat at the table. We have also been active in engaging multilateral partnerships, including the UN CDF local program, the High Ambition Coalition, and the NDC partnership. In our role as NDC partnership co-chairs, we oversaw the launch of the NDC's partnership finance strategy to mobilize international finance for NDC action this year. In closing, I wish to quote the UN Secretary General: "We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. We have to wave a red flag. We are failing to live up to the urgency required to deal with climate change." Finally, let me once again extend Jamaica's gratitude to the government of the people of the Arab Republic of Egypt and wish for a successful outcome for COP27. I invite colleagues to read the full, longer statement online and close with the fact that Jamaica repeats its call that climate action is indeed needed now. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Wah-Jin Han, Minister of Environment of the Republic of Korea. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, unprecedented scale of climate disasters are giving us dire warnings. Latest IPCC report also warned that global temperature rise could reach 1.5 degrees Celsius as early as 2040. We are at a critical juncture, and at this COP, we must produce a meaningful outcome that could move us forward. The Egyptian presidency and UNFCCC Secretariat have been making devoted efforts for the success of this COP, and let me pay sincere tribute to their dedication. With the completion of the rulebook last year, we are all set and ready to put the Paris Agreement into action. The next 10 years must be the critical decade for tackling climate change. To that end, this COP27 should be the starting point for stronger collaboration and solidarity among us. Korea is fully committed to this global climate action with its carbon-neutral green growth policies. This year, we launched the second-term Presidential Commission on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth, a public-private governance that oversees Korea's climate policies. The Commission plays a central role in establishing sectoral and annual roadmaps to achieve our 2030 NDC target. These roadmaps will be the basis of Korea's 20-year national plan for carbon neutrality and green growth, soon to be established. We will also work towards a balanced energy mix by using both nuclear power and the renewables, and introduce new energy sources such as hydrogen and ammonia. Emissions trading scheme will be upgraded further for market-based, cost-effective mitigation, along with the Korean green taxonomy that will promote green investments. We also introduced the climate impact assessment and climate responsive budgeting program so that our national planning and fiscal system are better aligned to our neutral vision. Excellencies, we learned from the recent mega floods and superstorms that adaptation also requires urgent global attention. Korea started its adaptation action by establishing its National Adaptation Plan in 2011. After successfully hosting the first Global Adaptation Week in 2019, the largest event of its kind, Korea is preparing for the second Adaptation Week in Songdo, Incheon, August next year. The event will bring together all countries at different development stages and open up constructive discussions on adaptation finance, technology support, and capacity building. We will share our experiences in adaptation action with the rest of the world. Korea will scale up its green ODA to above the OECD average level by 2025 to support developing countries' low carbon transition and share innovative green technologies with the world, as Korea President Yoon Suk-yeol addressed UN General Assembly last September. Our ODA projects will take a country-driven approach to meet the needs of each individual developing country. Excellencies, last year, countries came forward with more ambitious NDCs, and we saw global solidarity building up to achieve 1.5-degree goal. We must not lose this momentum. Not much time is left until 2030, so we should turn those pledges into bold action immediately. Korea stands ready to work with the international community in this common endeavor for stronger climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Stefano Canti, Minister of Territory and Environmental Agriculture, Civil Protection, and Relation with the Public Works State Corporation of San Marino. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me express my sincere gratitude to the government and people of the Arab Republic of Egypt for the excellent organization of this conference of the parties. Dear delegates, we are witnessing hard times. It is undeniable that instead of going forward, we are unfortunately going backwards. Our societies are proving the capable or unwilling to find real solution to climate change. It is true that several international crises have challenged an effort in this regard, from COVID-19 to the conflict, just to name a few. Yes, keeping a 1.5 degrees all alive and within reach sometimes seem an impossible goal, but it has never been more important. It truly must become a national priority for all of us, none excluded. In the last years, San Marino decided to become the open-air laboratory for innovation in order to attract new projects to tackle climate change on a small scale. We call UN again on honor small states and parties to join effort to implement common initiative to the world on the world beyond their reach. My country also decided to focus on sustainable housing. We are proud to recall that last October next, the Republic of San Marino hosted the 83rd meeting of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Territorial Development. We are even more proud to announce that meeting resulting in the San Marino Declaration, document enshrining valuable principles for more sustainable, fair and inclusive urbanization, with the winnable support of United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, attaining forest and being planted in San Marino. It might see little effort, but in a small territory, every little step is meaningful in order to help meeting the negative impact of climate change, as we ask to continue the transition toward resolution energy and more sustainable business model. Dear friends and colleagues, in times like this, we must work together to find solutions that will help overcome global climate change. We owe it to future generations, but also to ourselves as leaders, to the memory and to what we want to be remembered for. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Mr. Ruth Nankambirwa Setenawu, Minister of Energy and Mineral Development of Uganda. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by congratulating the Arab Republic of Egypt under the leadership of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and His Excellency Sameh Shoukry, the COP27 President, for championing an agenda that is focused on implementation of our climate action commitments, and I hereby pledge our full support for your leadership. While the rest of the world is witnessing record-breaking extreme weather, Africa in the last 21 months had more than 52 million people directly affected by droughts and floods. In Uganda, in addition to the loss and damage associated with these impacts, a new dimension to the climate change problem is taking root, and this is the involuntary climate-induced human mobility. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Arab Republic of Egypt and the Republic of Senegal for showing solidarity with 12 countries of the East Africa and the Horn of African countries in galvanizing international efforts to address this problem through the signing of the Kampala Declaration on Migration, Environment and Climate Change, which took place in July this year. The Kampala Declaration calls for increased international cooperation using a common approach to addressing this issue. Climate-induced migration requires urgent action now to minimize involuntary mobility outside the areas directly affected by climate change disasters. Uganda updated her NDC to a more ambitious target of attaining 24.7% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. An estimated cost of 28.1 billion US dollars is required to implement our mitigation and adaptation actions. And owing to the relatively small size of our economy, Uganda can mobilize only up to 15% of the resources required locally. I therefore call upon the international community to bridge the gap. Uganda welcomes innovative financing mechanisms for addressing climate change. However, we should emphasize that climate action must not lead to an increase in the already unsustainable levels of debt of the least developed countries who have historically contributed less to this climate emergency. Uganda calls for the climate finance to reach the lowest levels where it is needed most. Recent research has revealed that only 10% of the climate finance reaches the local level, and this is unacceptable. Uganda is one of the 6 countries piloting an LDC initiative for effective adaptation and resilience to increase the amount of resources allotted to local level climate action to 70%. Uganda welcomes the recognition by Glasgow Climate Pact of multiple forms and stages of just transition. We will continue engaging developing country partners for finance, capacity building, and technology support for our smooth transition. This will involve exploitation of our rich natural resource base to acquire the means of transitioning to clean energy, as well as pursuing sustainable development. The whole of Africa, and indeed the entire world, is heavy with expectations that COP27 builds on the gains made at COP26 in Glasgow to advance action on tackling the climate emergency. We also hope that COP27 becomes an opportunity to advance consensus on the establishment of funding arrangements to address loss and damage with transparent, predictable resources, which would be separate from adaptation finances. I would like to appeal to all parties to make good all earlier commitments and pledges and not to renege on them, as the case is with the funding of the Gender Action Plan. Thank you so much. I wish you fruitful deliberations for God and my country.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Prem Narayan Kandel, Secretary of the State Ministry of Forest and Environment of Nepal. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, at the outset, on behalf of the delegation of Nepal, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to the government of Arab Republic of Egypt for hosting COP27 in this beautiful Sharm el-Sheikh city. At the Climate COP21, heads of the state set a target to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and keep the temperature below 2 degrees Celsius in this century. However, the recent emission gap reports reveal that there has been inadequate progress in reducing the temperature level and the emission. Therefore, we anticipate that COP27 would focus to review commitment and renew solidarity to deliver on the landmark Paris Agreement. Nepal, being a landlocked mountain country with fragile topography, is facing the negative impact of climate change despite its negligible contribution to greenhouse gas emission. As we know that mountains are the water tower providing ecosystem service and climate regulation extend far beyond their geographical boundaries. However, mountains are fragile ecosystem. The climate crisis is making it even more fragile than before. Due to extreme climate events, Nepal is facing climate-induced disaster in different forms and extent, causing huge losses to the economy, ecosystem, and humanity. Melting snow and ice from the mountain contribute to sea level rise, and these two regions are interconnected, but mountains have yet to receive the same level of attention. Excellencies, Nepal has raised high climate ambition in its updated NDC to reach net zero emission by 2045, which is very earlier than the national target. It is the leader for effective implementation of local lead adaptation through participation of local stakeholders. We have already achieved to reverse the deforestation and maintain 45% forest cover. All climate change and sustainable development related policies are in place. Our development model is green, resilient, and inclusive. With abundant water, forest, and biodiversity resources, Nepal can contribute to sharing clean, green, and nature-based climate solutions in the region. However, to translate all those ambitions and plan into action, we need huge resources, technology, and capacity. I urge developed countries to ensure adequate technical and financial support to the economically and environmentally vulnerable countries like Nepal. Mr. President, we do not have gap in climate target and commitment,